Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Sunday. I am going to wait just a few minutes to give some people a chance to join and then we'll get started. It is Sunday, February the 27th. Good morning, Deborah. Good morning, Sandra. Thank you all for joining this morning. I'm going to wait just a few more minutes. Good morning, TJ. Good afternoon. Yes, it is afternoon where I am as well. So thank you. Good afternoon. Good morning. If it's good morning to you, good morning. If it is afternoon, good afternoon. I am waiting just a few minutes to give others a chance to join and then we'll get started. I thank you all for being here this morning. This is one of two of the segments in the Creating Home, a tiny house series um, content that I have been creating. Good morning. This is the What's Your Question portion of that segment. And I am alternating Sundays. So on next Sunday, we will have conversations on intimate spaces where I am speaking to guests in within the tiny house movement or doing something around the tiny house movement about their home and their journey. It's not the what I consider the fluffy conversation just about houses, but more about them and their journey and what their home represents for them. So that is one of the alternating Sundays in the series. And this Sunday, it is What's Your Question? And this is where I speak to some of the questions that are asked of me, sometimes in the comments on Instagram, YouTube, some of those questions that I can address kind of in a overall general nature that will help someone within their tiny house journey. And again, this is the What's Your Question? My name is Jewel Pearson. This is Miss Bohemian Soul TV. I built as what I consider a kind of fancy tiny house in 2015. And since that time, I have been sharing my journey and my experiences with everyone, hopefully to inspire someone who might be trying to consider joining the movement. I do, or interested in the movement, and just, or maybe just interested in the people who live in tiny houses. So I share my journey. I do also offer coaching and consultations and workshops and some other things to help others achieve the journey who are maybe stuck or don't know how to get to go. I do offer that help, and it is my intent to build literal and figurative community within the movement that is accessible by those who need it and who want it. And I hope that you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and select the notifications so that you'll be aware as new content is added. I am adding new content, live content every Sunday. So again, thank you all very much for um, being here this Sunday. I appreciate you participating. So today we are going to be talking, good morning. We are going to expand on part of what was the first episode in this series, the frequently asked questions or what's your question. The very first episode when I spoke to getting started and the parts of getting started and what someone needed to consider. And in that, the first part of that, it was considering um, all of the things that you needed to consider to get to a tiny house. And so now I want to talk about, and this is one of the most frequently asked questions as far as where can I put a tiny house? And that is one of the things that ends up being a showstopper for a lot of people because they don't know how to figure that piece out. And in my experiences, I've shared my journey. I built my house first, kind of knowing that I would find a location, and it absolutely worked out that way. I do get that not everyone is interested in taking that risk, and I get that. Um, until tiny houses um, are are more legal throughout the country, that right now that's kind of one of the challenges that people have to consider. And so I want to share some of the ways to find a location or some of the options for placing a tiny house. As I talk about this, I always say that this is the part that requires flexibility. Tiny houses aren't for everyone, obviously. And then until there is legalization, I guess, throughout the country, I always say that this necessarily isn't for the faint of heart. It might not be for someone who is really intent on being a rule follower because most of the time tiny houses exist in kind of a gray space. And so that's one of the things that I always suggest that someone who's interested in the movement but not quite sure um, how to proceed, that they consider that it's going to require some flexibility. It's going to require having a plan A, B, C, D, and onward. But again, I do share my experience because I've been successfully living in my house for 7 years. Obviously, I've moved um, locations, and some by choice, and not some not so much by choice, that I'll share as well. But the flexibility, and also knowing that, as you're going through it, sometimes it's stressful, but absolutely knowing that it's going to work out in the end is one of the ways that I move through and have been successful. And I know a lot of my counterparts are operating in that same way. So one of the things, as you consider where you can place a tiny house, and I realize I think my logo might be cutting off part of the title, but the question is, where can I place my tiny house? One of the things that you'll need to consider is that the rules are going to vary by city and county. There's not one blanket ruling for, the entire United States. There's not one blanket ruling for a specific state. It is going to vary by city, by county. And so what I always suggest is that to determine what the rules are in your area, call the your city officials, code enforcement, zoning. Call and find out how a specific area is zoned. Find out what the rules are. Ask questions. Don't necessarily give up your information and your property information. Just call and get some generic answers. That way, if you decide to move forward and it's not technically legal, you've not already given up your information. So that's one of I mean, again, and this is why I said, if you're a stickler for following the rules, this might not be for you right now, but that's one of the things to consider. That, call, ask questions, don't necessarily give up your information to find out what the rules are in your area. And then one of the other things that I would say to you is become an advocate for tiny houses. If it's not legal in your area, then take it upon yourself to become an advocate for tiny houses, so that you are trying to, as you're learning and interested in the movement, you're having those conversations with the local officials to help them understand that this is something that you'd like to see as an option, a legal option in the area, and be interested in doing the work to kind of sway some of their reasoning behind why it's not legal, so that they can understand that this is something that they should be considering. So, with that, some of the options for places where you can place your tiny house. So, if you have personal property, again, this is where you'll need to call to find out how your property is zoned, what the rules are. And as we're talking here, let me clarify. I am talking about tiny houses on wheels. In episode 1, which was how to get started. There was one of the decisions where I said there's a decision that you have to make as to whether you're considering a tiny house on wheels or a tiny house on foundation. And tiny houses on foundation are a totally different subject, a separate subject. You then, if you're building on foundation, you are dealing with the permitting process and the city's process for building on foundation, which is um, exactly like the process for building a conventional home, just your home would be a smaller size. I am not referencing that process at all as we're talking this morning. I am specifically talking about tiny houses on wheels. So, um, one of the considerations, if you have personal property and you're interested in placing a tiny house on wheels on personal property, what I would say is for you to call again and ask the questions from zoning, from building code enforcement to understand what the rules are for tiny houses, how your property is zoned. Again, not necessarily giving up your personal information, your address, that information, or even your name. You're just getting general information so that you can make your decisions of how you're going to proceed. And then for personal property, it's really going to be up to you. If you call and they say, well, we don't allow tiny houses in this area, then it kind of gets it. There's a decision point for you if you're going to say, okay, no, it's not allowed and I'm not going to proceed. Or if you kind of decide, I'm going to proceed and I'm just going to operate under the radar. And again, that I'm not leading you in any direction. Um, I operate under the radar. It's a gray area, and most of my counterparts are operating that way. Most of the people that I kind of know that have been successful in the movement are operating that way. Again, I am not steering you in any direction, but there is a decision that has to be made at this point whether you're going to proceed or not. If you are going to proceed in this gray area, then and you're going to put a tiny house on personal property, one of the things that you have to know is that the city, if there's not already an existing structure there that has water and electricity coming to it, you still will not be able to place a tiny house on personal property as a sole um, in sole existence, because the city is not going to provide water, power, the utilities to a tiny house on wheels on personal property. So the assumption is that if you have personal property, there's already a structure there that has existing water and power. And then if you're going to place the tiny house on that property, you would be tapping off of that existing structure. So that is the consideration for personal property. Again, there are very few, if any, areas that I'm aware of. And I think let me change that. There are some cities that are permitting tiny houses as structures, single structures on a piece of property. That is usually the case more in on the west. And again, it's going to vary by county, by city, and they are then going to allow you to have utilities for the tiny house on wheels, but that is not the norm. So personal property, we've talked about that. Backyards is kind of the same situation as personal property, but in the backyard option, you are then considering parking your tiny house also in someone else's backyard. And it's basically the same scenario as personal property. You'd maybe want to call and find out what the rules are. Um, if it's not allowed, then you and that homeowner decide that you're going to proceed and following the same process of you're then going to tap off of the existing structures, utilities to power and have water for your home. In those situations, I also advise that you have a rental agreement with that property owner that outlines that you are the homeowner, the tiny house owner, and you are renting space in that person's backyard. Um, Also, I recommend within that rental agreement that you have a clause that, should the city get involved, especially if you're operating in that gray area, should the city get involved, then and you're required to move, then that terminates your rental agreement so that you're not on the hook for the additional terms of the agreement if the city requires that you move. So that is your backyard options, your personal property and your backyard options. One of the other things that I'll say about this is that you want to um, make it easy as possible to be able to locate your tiny house in someone's backyard. And what I mean when I say that is to evaluate your power usage. Don't necessarily be a power hog so that the existing structure won't be able to support your home. So you want to maybe even consider if you're going to have solar power. That is obviously going to give you some flexibility that will allow you to place your home in different scenarios where if there is no power on the property, you still can power your home, or as a backup generator. So consider your power usage and your power options. Also, a self-contained waste system as far as your toilet. You would want to use a composting toilet or an incinerating toilet. Trying to have a tiny house on wheels and you have a flush toilet that's going to need to tap into sewage, which is going to require permitting, which is expensive. All of those things are going to knock you out of being able to be flexible and be located in different spaces. A flush toilet, a standard flush toilet, and needing to tap into sewage is always going to be a challenging situation that is going to require you either to be on personal property where you don't intend to move, where you've already gone through permitting, and you're going to be able to tap into existing sewage. And again, that is oftentimes costly and requires permitting. So make it as easy as possible so that you're self-contained in your waste situation and your power usage, not being elaborate so that it's not sustainable on someone's property. And then your other options for places to put a tiny house is going to be tiny house communities, and they do exist. There are tiny house communities throughout the country. I will, once this video posts, I will share some links in the video description that will include a link to some tiny house communities that I'm aware of, so that you can pursue those if you're interested. Then also there are RV parks, and some RV parks will allow tiny houses. You would need to check with the specific RV park to ensure they will allow tiny houses. Some RV parks are going to require that the tiny house be RVIA certified, or maybe have the NOAA certification. So that means you're going to have had to work with an RVIA certified builder, or you've gone through the NOAA certification process for your tiny house. And that's a quick Google if you're not familiar with either of those. But I did also talk about that in the first episode of how to get started, because RVIA certification can also help you with financing. And so those are interconnected. Um, Farms in rural areas. Farms have more flexibility around zoning. Tiny houses can exist on farms as oftentimes as like outbuildings. Farms also have some flexibility in that kind of people, for lack of better words or terms, people kind of do what they want on their farm. And so those are options for you for farming in rural areas. People I won't say the rules are easier, but people kind of do more of what they're going to do on their own property. And also the property is expansive, so it's not necessarily something that's visible to everyone. And that's one of the things I forgot to mention as I was talking about personal property and backyards. A key to successful long term, if you decide you're going to go the gray area route and you no, it's not technically legal, but you're still going to go that route. You also want to be sure that it's not something that's just visible to everybody. That's kind of how you end up telling on yourself. One of the things that we've learned for the most part is that building code enforcement and those people aren't necessarily driving around looking for infractions. Usually somebody has called on you if they become aware of you, or in one of my cases where I had to move, the neighborhood was actually going through gentrification. So as the houses were being upfit and they were building code enforcement and zoning was in and out of the neighborhood because of that. And that's how they became kind of alerted to my situation, is what I believe. So, excuse me, not necessarily making yourself visible is one of the things. And as we speak about farms and rural areas and the extended property, that's one of the ways that people are more successful because there's more space. Um, Here is one of the things that I speak to a lot because as a woman of color, a black woman, RV parks, I've initially had my home located in an RV park. I had to deal with racism and I ended up not feeling safe in that space and moved and had to relocate my home. I've had the same situation happen at a farm location in a rural area previous to my current farm location. And it became an unsafe space for me to the point where somebody was eventually arrested for racial intimidation at that location with someone else on the property. This is the piece where I'm very passionate about the work that I'm doing because I feel like it is not this conversation is not represented in the larger conversations, and I feel like I have some responsibility to for awareness and for sharing that for Black people and people of color to be aware, as well as our counterparts, so that they can be aware that this is happening and use themselves as allies in this conversation. Sonia, I see your comment that nobody cares. I'm going to challenge that and say that they do. Um, um, Here and so this is the piece where I say racism is can't be the reason that Black people and people of color aren't able to be successfully and safely in the tiny house movement. So with that, there are some Black owned campgrounds and RV parks. I will share that link also in this just in the description for this video. And I am also working on an initiative that I've shared several times, the cooperative communities. And I have spoken about my experience with experiencing racism in the movement. I talked about that in my luxury living in a tiny house video. It is one of the things that and the reason why, because I've had to move my home twice. And it's not something that I considered as I was going, and maybe call it me being naive. It wasn't something that I had really considered as I was building my house. And it was something that, kind of smacked me in the face in the RV park when I'm sitting there realizing, okay, so I didn't think this all the way through, and now I have to come up with a plan B. It's not one of the things that's going to stop me from being in the movement, but what it is going to do is require me to make sure that I am trying to find avenues to help others who are who want to be in this movement. So, with that, I have worked on a partnering opportunity where I have um, requested that Black farmers and Black property owners um, who need our assistance, because if you're aware of if what's happening with Black farmers and how they're losing their property because of racism, because of some of the same challenges that we just encounter overall, and I'll drop a link in the description as well. Um, about the challenges that Black farmers have. So if you're not aware of that, then you can educate yourself. But the partnering that I have been working on is partnering with Black property owners, Black farmers, with Black tiny house owners, so that a farmer who is interested in allowing tiny house parking on their property, um, I can connect them with a Black tiny house owner who is looking for a location and a safe location. Again, this is on the luxury living in a tiny house video. This is one of the things that it seems triggering to people who feel like what I'm doing is racist or reverse racist. I suppose it is not. It is for safety reasons, and I've explained that to ad nauseum, and I'm kind of over explaining it. But this is one of the things that, for us to be successful in the movement, this is one of the things that I have tried to put in place to help us have safe locations. There's no reason why safety outside of one of the challenges, obviously, is finding a location for your tiny house. It makes no sense that on top of that, um, we then have to consider um, racism as another reason why we can't find a safe space. So, um, I will drop all of the information. I'll drop the information about the farmers, the challenges that our farmers are dealing with. I will also drop the information about the black-owned campgrounds and RV parks. And when a plug for the black-owned campgrounds and RV parks, and I will be talking to one of the owners within the series, the Tiny House Conversations. They are not specific to only allowing Black people on their property. So let me clarify that before someone speaks to that. They are Black owned. Everyone can participate or can go to the campground, can park there as an RVer, but it is a safe space for Black people. Um, Thank you, Eve. Eve is saying no need to over explain anything. I find myself over explaining all of the time because people get so in their feelings when I start talking about black tiny houses, black tiny house owners wanting to work with a black builder. And this is it. And so thank you. I agree that there's no need to over explain as I over explain, but thank you for that. All right, so that's RV parks, farms, and rural areas. There will be information in the description to find more details on the cooperative communities opportunity that I am working on, as well as access information on the Black owned campgrounds and RV parks. All right, and then the last piece here, the opportunity for where you can place a tiny house is on the West Coast. They are doing a really, really good job of understanding that tiny houses offer an opportunity for houselessness, offer an opportunity for affordable housing, and they are trying to address the housing crisis that they're dealing with. And so they have very smartly um, in several cities within California, they allow tiny houses on wheels as accessory dwelling units in backyards in some cities in California. So with that what that means is so an accessory dwelling unit is kind of like if you consider a home, a conventional home that has a secondary home in their backyard. It might be like a garage space, but it's an accessory dwelling unit. Most times, or most cities require that they be on foundation. They also require, if they allow accessory dwelling units, because that's the first thing. Some cities don't even allow accessory dwelling units. So then there's the process of getting the city to permit accessory dwelling units. Some cities allow accessory dwelling units, and then those are what I just stated, like a garage in the backyard or a smaller structure in the backyard. What that the requirements usually have been that the accessory dwelling unit has to be owned by the main homeowner. They have to be owned by that same person, and they also require that they be on foundation. The cities in California are allowing that accessory dwelling units can be owned by separate people. So the tiny house on wheels, they're allowing tiny houses on wheels. It does not have to be on foundation, and they're allowing that tiny house on wheels can be owned by someone different than the conventional homeowner. I'll drop some information in the description of the video of some of the cities that I'm aware of in California that are allowing accessory dwelling units, tiny houses on wheels as accessory dwelling units. This is one of the things that it's kind of how I was operating as in the backyard where and what this allows, let me step back. What this allows is tiny houses on wheels to be in urban areas. This also allows people to have access to communities that they may have not had access to before, because they couldn't afford to be in that community. So it's a win-win, because it's providing housing, it's providing access to communities that people may not have had before, and it's something very that's being done that's very smart. Um, it is one of the models that, as I was in the backyard here in North Carolina, I was trying to have that conversation with building code and zoning about what it was being done on the West Coast, and kind of using that as a model. The people who are doing the work on the West Coast, they're very happy to assist in that conversation if that's a conversation that your city or county would be open to considering. And so it's a model. What I was trying to share with the people here is, it's a model that's being done, being used, and it's being used very successfully. And so if you just take that model and apply it here to, your city or your county, you don't even really have to reinvent the wheel. The model has already been put in place for us. And so that's one of the things, as I say to people, to become an advocate for the movement. Those are the conversations that I will encourage you to have with your local officials to help move and legalize tiny houses as options, and to make this process not so difficult for, as people are coming along that that want to live differently, want to achieve home ownership quicker, as tiny houses offer, so that we can make this an option and help others throughout the country be able to achieve tiny house living on wheels in various communities. So that's the information that I had prepared for this discussion. Um, Putting a tiny house on wheels, the options to consider on personal property, backyards, tiny house communities, RV parks, farms, and rural areas, and then the option of an accessory dwelling unit in some of the cities. So I will say, before I start checking to see if there's some questions or comments in the chat that I can answer. If you found this information helpful to you, I hope that you will share this information. Share the YouTube video with others so that they can also be aware of this information. I also ask that you subscribe to the channel, that you turn on the notifications so that you're aware when new content is added, so that you can be here participating and hopefully learning something and sharing the information with others. All right, let me check out the comments and see if is there are any questions that I can answer. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Marva. Very happy for you to be here as well. Hi, Dee Dee. Thank you. I appreciate y'all getting up and spending your Sunday morning, Sunday early afternoon with me. Precious is saying we have to push the meter to make change, ask for forgiveness rather than permission. I agree with that. And I can honestly say my counterparts, that is what, and when I say counterparts, I'm talking about the people in the movement who don't necessarily share the same skin color as me. That is what my counterparts have been doing from day one. For me, as a Black woman, I think we know we sometimes have to operate a little bit differently, and we walk a little more cautiously. But I'm also aware that we too have to push the meter to make change. And as my counterparts have been successful in operating kind of in this gray area, that's one of the reasons that I share this information, because I watch that success, and I want that success for us as well. Um, Here's a good question. What has that timeline looked for you in the instances you have worked with local government to really make legal changes? I'm sure it isn't overnight, but it feels like years sometimes. I mean, I concur with that. What I have learned is they don't do anything quickly. They have a lot of antiquated processes, and they have a lot of antiquated thinking. So I have twice, I have had conversations with the city of Charlotte about tiny houses. When I first built my house, I was in conversation with them and kind of was jumping through hoops. They wanted me to um, involve a structural engineer, sign off on some different things. I did all of that work only to get to no. And all of that work, as well as there was some expense involved to get to know. And then 5 years later, I went through the same process. Trying at once, I was in the neighborhood where they were the neighborhood that was going through gentrification, and when they became aware of my house. And so, in the initial discovery, they thought that the homeowner where I was parked had just built an accessory dwelling unit and hadn't gone through the permitting process. And so they ticketed or they cited him. And so then I knew either I was going to move my home or I was going to try to deal with them. So I tried to deal with them. So I asked them for an extension for us to have some conversation. And I went through the process with them for about 6 months. And at the lower level, the people that I was dealing with initially, they were very interested in, most of them are actually interested in tiny houses, truth be told. And so the lower level people that I was dealing with at building code enforcement were were interested in going through the process to see if it was something that they could consider. Zoning was like, hey, we're good with it if you can get building code enforcement on deck with it. So building code enforcement, I started with this lower level group of people. They were going to require me to have an inspection of my house, and they were like, to inspect your house, we will need to kind of go into the wall, cut out the wall and look into the structure, blah, 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 since my house had already been built. I was like, I'm fine with that. I can repair whatever it is that you all need to look at. What I'm really trying to get to is you all to permit to allow me to have my tiny house on wheels here. And what I was saying before, when they thought the homeowner had just built an accessory dwelling unit, I knew then I've got to tell them that. But and they were saying for him to go through the permitting process. Obviously now I've got to say it's a tiny house on wheels. They couldn't see my wheels. I always camouflage my wheels. And so then that's when I kind of told on myself, but I was like, hey, I want to go through this process. So they were going to go through this process, have me do an inspection. They were going to assign some cost, and I'm sure it wasn't going to be cheap, and I was okay with that. I just want to pay some money, have you all do your inspection so you all can allow me to do this legally and leave me alone. So we go through all of that. I had to hire through this process they don't talk to the regular consumer, for lack of a better word. So I had to hire my architect to be the liaison to deal with them. They'd only deal with an architect, so I did that. They had the requirement again for a structural engineer, blah, blah, blah. I had already done that, so I pulled that information back up for them. I've gone through all of this process, and it was not a quick process. And I'm thinking we were probably at this time about 4 or 5 months in. And as we got right to where I got all of the information and they were going to supposedly review it and come back with the next steps determination, somebody forwarded the email to a higher up within building code enforcement. And that person, without even considering all of the work that had all of the work that had been put into it, all of the conversations that I'd had with them previously, saying yes, we'll proceed, he shut the conversation completely down, and came back and he said something about this is a tiny house on wheels. We won't consider it. So at this point, I'm like, well, it's not like you discovered anything new. We knew from the beginning it was a tiny house on wheels, and they said we're going through this process, and they're allowing me through this process. There was no reasoning with this person, and everyone that was at the lower level within building code enforcement, in my opinion, they weren't willing to challenge him. And so the conversation just completely shut down. And so at this point, I'm 6 months in, and I've spent a nice chunk of money for me to get back to no, and no one will even further the conversation. So it is not an overnight process. My conversation with Charlotte and my thinking around Charlotte is right now they are in pursuit of the big financial house, the big ticket items. They have no real need to consider affordable housing, even though, they use the terminology and say it's something that they're considering. They have no real need to consider that from a budget perspective, even though they have a real need to consider it from the houseless population and their crisis and the real affordable housing crisis. But it's just not something that they're concerned with. I am now in a different county. I am in on a farm in a rural area, and I am trying to have conversations with the people in this area about tiny houses, and I'm hoping to push that further. One of the things that I think as I'm having this conversation, and I'm hoping to be successful in this conversation, is that people in rural areas are more used to mobile home parks and RV parks, and they're more used to people who are financially challenged, who are, as one of the terms someone shared with me, land rich and cash poor. So I feel like they are more open to having these conversations than some of the big cities are. And so I'm hoping that these conversations go further. And so the long answer, as I've shared all of that, is it's not, again, it's not one of the things that's for the faint of heart. This is really hard work. This advocacy is hard work, and it takes a lot of time to change minds and hearts. And it's something that at the end of the day, I feel like it'll be worth it, but it's not easy going for sure. Thank you for that question. Sorry for my very long answer. Um, let's see. RR says we're planning to begin our build about a year from now, and even in Los Angeles, California, not so simple. Open to moving out of the state, etc. This lifestyle is our priority, and the rest will come together. I agree. That's one of the ways I have moved in this movement in knowing that it's going to be okay. I always say for somebody who needs to have security as far as, I'm allowed to have this tiny house here. It may not be their time right now. They may have to wait a few years when it all actually comes together. But California again is one of the areas where they allow tiny houses as accessory dwelling units. So I feel like you have a leg up in that area. Let's see. Okay, Sonia, thank you for that explanation. Sonia's nobody cares before. She's saying that her child was on her computer. So thank you for that clarification. Let's see. Let's see if I see some questions. Epic Idea and Initiative. I'm thinking you're talking about the cooperative communities, and thank you. I feel like I appreciate that. Our farmers need our help, and Black people in the movement, interested in the movement, need safe spaces. So I feel like it is an opportunity for cooperative community, and I want to be able to facilitate some of those conversations. Thanks, Sonia, for the apology. Thank you, Christy. Courtney says, I need to schedule a consultation. Yes, Courtney, you do. You do. You do. I'm sharing this information, but I would love to have an opportunity to work with you one on one. I will share the ways to contact me for consultations in the description also. Let's see. Very welcome. Very welcome. Let's see. Will there be year-round RV and campgrounds? I have no idea. I am going to share a link. I don't know the specifics of of how their parks work, but I will be sharing the link to contact them individually and ask those questions. Um, Christy says, I'm hoping to buy land and offer a couple of parking spaces for women of color who are now empty nesters. That's beautiful. That is how we will further this movement. So that is beautiful. Um, Shar Ingram says, as as I was over explaining why, as I get called a racist all the time, that's their issue of insecurity. They can Google as well to see previous and current racism. It ain't new. I agree with that 100%. But what I have learned is when apparently when you're used to operating as the default, when everything is catered to you and everything that you see represents you, when someone calls out that they're not the default, we have to do things to for our safety, or we have to specifically seek out minority builders so that they also get business, and they're called minority builders for a reason. They're not the norm, and so specifically am seeking them out so that I can give them business because the default is a white business person. Or like when I've said I wanted to use a black builder, and when I speak to the movement, and the movement is traditionally a white led hipster movement, and you very rarely see people of color, but they don't recognize that. But it's when I call that out that they feel triggered, and so it's just a mess. And you're right, they can Google it and see um, if they want to learn, and that I feel like that is the key there. They're not interested in learning, they just want to try to call it out as reverse racism. All right, let's see. Dee Dee says, thank you. This is exactly the information we need to move forward. So I thank you. Again, this is the what's your question? And this is the second um, installment in the Creating Home, a Tiny House series. So I appreciate you being here. Every other week, I am trying to answer some questions because I want to be able to help us move forward, to help people who are interested in the tiny house move forward. Somebody says they're in Gwinnett County. I'm from Gwinnett County. I lived in Lawrenceville for many, many years. Let's see, let's see, let's see. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, RR. I don't see, getting to the end of it. The list you have compiled, any in Tennessee. I'm assuming that you are talking about the cooperative communities. I'm pretty sure there's some in Tennessee. For the cooperative communities, what I am requiring. So let me speak to this. So I'll share the link. Once you get the link, you will be able to read the information about the program, and there's a participation form. So the participation form can be completed by the landowner and completed by the tiny house owner. What I am doing so that I am being aware of respecting the farmer's time. A farmer and a landowner, at the end of the day, their main work is to farm their property. So they can't be out here answering so many questions all willy nilly and entertaining potential tiny house owners. So what I require is that the someone who is interested in a property, your build has to be 6 months away from completion before I will actually connect you with the tiny house farmer. Again, I have to be respectful of their time. I have to only I I want to connect them with people who are actually interested in actually building a tiny house. I don't want them speaking to somebody who's just doing some information gathering, because that's not being respectful of their time. So let me put that out there. You have to be 6 to 9 months away from a tiny house build, preferably six. So then I have people who say, well, how is it that I'm going to build a tiny house and I still don't know the location, and you won't connect me to the tiny house, the property owner? And I'm going to take you back to what I said in the beginning. This is one of those things. If you have to have concrete, specific details, then this might not be your time right now for the tiny house movement, because it requires flexibility. I'm going to keep saying that. It requires flexibility. So if you are building a tiny house, there are some resources. So there's again, tiny house communities, the option that I'm working on. You have to know that it's going to work out. It can't be all laid out as it is for conventional homes, because that's just not the way they're working right now. So I will put that out there for the way I am managing the connection with the tiny house farmer, so that you are aware of that requirement. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Um, oh, the one thing that I failed to mention, so resources for tiny house, as you're looking for a tiny house location. There are a number of Facebook groups that are dedicated for tiny house placement. There's a tiny house hosting group, and then many of the individual cities and states have their own Facebook groups. So get connected into those Facebook groups for specifics for that specifics for that area. There are lots of Facebook groups, and you can learn from people who are in that area who sometimes will share their process if they have a tiny house, what they went through, maybe even who they spoke to, what their process was, and you can then gather some information from there. Also, word of mouth, letting people know that, hey, I'm interested in building a tiny house and I need a location. You'll be surprised of who knows somebody that has some property that might be interested in allowing you to park on their property. So, word of mouth is always good. I've also had two or three of my locations, I found success using Craigslist. I put together an ad on Craigslist about myself, kind of high level information, not personal information, but what it is that I need for support from my home from a electrical water standpoint. And then had different people reach out to me on Craigslist that were interested in allowing me to park on their location. Obviously vet them, but I've had success very for two or three times I've said with through Craigslist. I put my ad on all of the pages within Craigslist, not just relying on one location, so that anybody looking through Craigslist, they might be looking for buying some lawn equipment or whatever, but see your ad and then know that they have property and might be interested. And then I also suggest canvassing in the area. So if there's a specific area that you're interested in for a tiny house, canvass the area and look at properties that might be able to support a tiny house. Again, keeping in mind you don't want to be all out in the open. You want it to be a big enough property that would support your home. And then I follow up with writing that person a letter at that particular property to say, hey, the same kind of this same scenario that I would put my information on Craigslist. This is my home. This is some background about who I am. I can provide some conventional rental references. I'm interested in paying for rent and for renting on your property, and just some background information about you. And I send those letters to kind of like a dear property owner letter. And I was doing this in 2015 when I first built. So of course people were thinking I was a little weird because they weren't familiar with tiny houses. But now everybody knows about tiny houses, so it's not that weird for consideration for parking in a tiny house. And so those are some resources to you to use as you're trying to find a location. It takes work. It is not something that is easy. When I built my tiny house, I've always shared that in addition to building my tiny house, my part-time job was looking for a location. All of this takes work and flexibility, and I'm going to keep saying that. And if you're not ready to do the work, then this just might not be for you right now. You kind of wait a little while if you're not really to commit at that level. Okay, here's a question. What's an average cost for a Bay Area tiny house on wheels to place in a backyard? I don't know the average cost. I'm on the East Coast. I do know as I see people in the some of the Facebook groups that I'm in, I see numbers that are two, maybe even three times what I'm used to paying on the East Coast. And as I understand it, those are valid rental requirements based on the fact that it is the West Coast and it's way more expensive. Housing is way more expensive. Um, I can't speak to it, but that is what something that I have noticed in some of these groups. Afia, thank you so much for the super chat. Hey, so let me point that out. Super chat on any of these conversations, and I don't necessarily push it on the conversation with me, but I'm always grateful for it. Super chat, or if you, I don't have my Cash App to drop today. I'm delinquent. I am open to tips. Super chat is when somebody sends some money that they want to grace the host or my guests with for the time that we're sharing to answer these questions and to share our journey. So I am always grateful for super chats. Thank you, Afia, very much for that. When I'm on my game and have all of my ducks in a row, I'll also drop my Cash App because YouTube takes a, as you can imagine, takes a portion of the super chats, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Here's a question. What other groups or organizations should we be part of for info and advocacy? Um, there's not one standard tiny house group. There are kind of a couple of groups, and sometimes they're on opposite ends of what they're doing, and it seems to be a little I can't. I think it becomes more of personal than overall looking out for the community. I don't want to go. I don't want to speak on that. There's not one organization. It's kind of like just following some of the people that you know are in the movement and doing the work to kind of gather your own information and try and one of the things that I know, like within my news channels, I have tiny houses is one of the words that my news channel is pulling information so that I can try to stay aware of what other cities and states are doing and as legalization is happening. So that's the only thing that I can really suggest to you for um, staying connected. Um, Great information and actionable steps. I thought resources mentioned regarding Black farmers would be listed in the description box. It absolutely will. Once the video is completed and it's uploaded, I then go in and have to update the description information. So I'm going to thank you, Christy. I am posting all of this after the live feed. Thank you so much. It will be there once I have a chance for this to upload. I appreciate it. So Precious said it can't be done while she's live. Thank you, Precious. I appreciate that. I am a multitasker, but there is only so much that I can do. I appreciate y'all knowing. Thank you for staying, for helping me out and answering some of the questions. Thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. I try to share as much information with you all as I can, and I will update it in the description post once it uploads. Happy Soulful Sunday. Thank you very much, Monica. Um, let's see. We will prevail. Absolutely. We are going to prevail. That is one of the, when I say in my introduction, and I missed it this morning, I say that I've shared my journey and I am um, serving up some representation all along. That is I've always shared. I've shared the older lady who reached out to me after my episode aired in 2015 on HGTV, and she said I was the Harriet Tubman of tiny houses. And not I don't take myself too seriously, and I know she wasn't saying I haven't done any a fraction of what Miss Tubman has done, but I do feel like as I have continued within this journey and continued within the movement. There came a point where there was a responsibility as I was trying to ensure that as I was thinking that we were within the movement, we were challenging the status quo of housing. And as I was thinking we were challenging the status quo of housing, I was thinking that we were going to be doing things that would include the people who had not previously been included in the housing conversation. If we're going to challenge it, let's, almost let's burn it down and do it right. And let's include the people who haven't been included. And then I realized, no, that's not what they were doing. They just really wanted to get legalization for tiny houses on wheels. And that was it. So for me, there became a responsibility because as I was sharing my journey and the different experience that I was having, where I was having to move my house because of racist in an RV park, and then here I go again in a rural area, and I've had experiences dealing with racism, going to tiny house events because they're held in rural areas, and it's again not safe spaces, and I've had a totally different experience than my counterparts in some ways because of race, and it's not something that I'm seeking. It's just something that, hey, as I show up, they see my brown face, and that's what happens. With that came a responsibility that I needed to ensure that we were able to be in this movement, and that is the work that I am am doing here. And somebody said, "Can we see you in a larger view?" Y'all know I'm trying to work on this tool. Thank you so much, Linda. I forgot that I was not. not sharing in a larger view. So yes, that is the work that I want to do so that we can be in this movement as well. I share for everyone. The information that I shared today was for everyone for placement for a tiny house, but there also has to be a conversation for um, the community, for people who look like me to be in this movement so that they can understand the challenges that they're going to face because of being a person of color, being a black person, and me trying to find resources to help move the community forward. All right. Do I know anything about Nash County, North Carolina, and their laws concerning tiny homes? I do not. I'm not even familiar with Nash County to know where that is. As I mentioned, the rules are specific to cities and counties, and so you are going to have to reach out to them directly to see what the rules are. And again, don't give too much information. Just ask some questions. Um, let's see. Someone is explaining something. Do you have contacts with black farmers in Cali? Um, what I think I have, and I don't know the list offhand, but I actually think the contact that I have, because what is permitted within this connection, within this partnership, I've added, if there are white people who want to be allies to us in this journey, who are aware of the things that I've shared, the reasons why this type of program is required. If they're interested in being an ally and they recognize what it is that we need from them in support for safety, that they can participate. And there's like a disclaimer. I don't know if disclaimer is the right word. There's something that they have to sign off on, saying that they understand why this is necessary and they're interested in supporting. And so I think the person that I have that's in Cali is actually a white person who wants to be an ally, and has signed up for the partnership. And so um, if you go through the process and sign up with the participation form, at some point you'll see the cities. But I do think Cali is someone that's representing as an ally. Thank you for my 9.99 super chat. Thank you. Let's see. Let's see. I think I'm out of questions. Let's see. Thank you for my super chat. Uh, let's see. I know most of your focus is for America, but has there been any outreach from other countries or specifically African or Caribbean states? I have not personally ventured out of that. I've had some conversations with um, a group in Panama, but right now I'm kind of dealing with the United States. I would love to have this something that I can help with outside of the United States, but I've not done any work there. Let's see. What would you advise for folks getting tiny houses to be experts in to help with getting a tiny home? To take, i.e., take a crash course in zoning, general contracting, tiny home maintenance. Mm, I don't know that I have an answer for that. To be an expert, I don't know. Understanding a tiny house build for sure, because it is not the same as a traditional build, and kind of being well versed in that. And shameless plug, I do offer those type workshops. I think the specifics of understanding a tiny house would be the first place I would start there. All right. Is there a way to work with you and your mission? I think you might be talking about the cooperative communities, or I don't know if you're talking about just the work overall that I'm doing. Staying plugged in, sharing the information here. Um, if I have a call for action, if you would support that, that's probably. the best ways right now. I don't have any specific calls for action, but I appreciate the offer, and if you'll just stay plugged in. Um, Rich says, I have a tiny house on wheels, and I finally found a park to place it on. As a black man, you have inspired me, Jewel. I would love to work with you. Thank you, Rich. Congratulations to you. I know what that feels like. Congratulations to you, and I would love to have your assistance. All right. What's 199, 999 is 717. Are those some number? Those were the some super chats. Do I need to go play those numbers? Those are some interesting numbers. Thank you all very much for the super chats. Um, thank you. Let's see. Um, Shar says, thank you for being and sharing information. Are you connected with John Boyd, who is the president of the Black Farmers Association? I am not. I'm not familiar with him, and maybe I should be. So that's something that I will try to look into. Thank you for that information. Dee Dee, I think, Dee Dee is saying congratulations, and I'm pretty sure she's talking to Rich, who just shared with us that he has found a park for his tiny house. So we're excited for you, Rich. Everybody here is saying congratulations. All right. I don't see any other questions. I thank you all very much for joining me this Sunday morning, Sunday early afternoon, depending on where you're located. Um, Absolutely, Rich. I appreciate your support. I hope you have enjoyed today's session. And again, I will ask you to continue joining and supporting. Again, this is the um, Creating Home, a Tiny House series. This is the What's Your Question segment of the series. This is one of two segments. In next Sunday, we will be back in conversation um, with someone in the movement. The series that we will have next Sunday is the conversations on intimate spaces. And if I do say so myself, the conversations have been fabulous. So if you have not checked out some of those conversations, please be sure to do so. Um, Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us on Sundays. And then if you are missing a session, be sure to join and catch up on YouTube and like and share the videos and do all of and put your notifications on because we always have live content on Sundays. And I'm grateful that you all are joining for the conversations. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. I thank you all for your super chats and for your love and your participation. And I hope everybody has a great Sunday. Take care, everybody.